In the future, the United States of America was destroyed by a severe drought, and people became willing to kill for water. Most of the population left the country, but the Holm family stayed because the father, Ernest, was convinced that the crops could grow again if water was found. Ernest remembered when the land was green, but his son Jerome did not. One day, two thieves attempted to break into a small building on Ernest's farm by burning the lock. Ernest caught them in the act and shot at them, causing one of the thieves to fire back. One thief was killed instantly, while the other begged for mercy, claiming he was told there was water in the building. He also claimed he wanted to go to the bathroom and put his hand in his pocket, but Ernest saw the gun and shot him. Jerome saw everything from a distance and claimed he could help his father, but Ernest only told him to call him Dad instead of by his first name. Then, Ernest opened the small building, which turned out to be a well. Unfortunately, there was no water in the well, so they had to force the donkey to continue the journey without drinking. The two continued their journey and found the water men, a group of people who monopolized the distribution of water extracted from deep wells through a deal they made with the government. Ernest gave them supplies and food, and in return, they gave him water. Jerome thought they must never anger these people, as they were more dangerous than they seemed. They had to deal with them cautiously, take the water, and leave. Ernest always tried to convince them to give him water for his farm, but the water men demanded large sums of money. On the way back, the donkey stumbled and was severely injured. Ernest was forced to end its suffering, so he shot it. Jerome cried but swore he would have done the same thing if he were in his father's place. When they returned to the farm, Mary, Ernest's daughter, served them food and then washed the dishes with dirt. Afterward, Ernest sat down to listen to the radio while Jerome drew animals, which was their only hobby. Suddenly, Ernest heard a noise and went out to discover that Mary had escaped through the window to meet her secret lover. The next day, Jerome and Ernest went to Sam's auction house and participated in an auction to buy a robot known as Shadow Sim or Sim to replace the donkey. Flame, Sam's son, also entered the auction and bid against them until the last moment, but Ernest won the auction, significantly increasing his debts. After that, they went to the hospital to visit Catherine, the mother of his children, who couldn't walk due to an accident. The hospital had a special machine connected to her via a wire to help her walk, and the only way for the family to bring Catherine home was to buy this expensive machine. After spending a long time with Catherine, the two of them returned home, and on the way, they saw Ruby and Soze with a child. Ernest considered them to be people who exploit their children to gain people's sympathy and get money. He avoided them and walked away. Then they went to the gas station, and after filling up the tank, Ernest drank a little to spend the rest of the money he had. Then he returned to Ruby and his family and gave them water. The couple was thinking of selling the child because they couldn't afford to raise him, but Ernest advised them not to do that and promised to help them with water. Later, Flem came to the farm, and it turned out that he was Mary's secret lover. Flem asked to rent the robot Sim and promised to pay the rent, but Ernest refused unless Flem's father, Sam, signed a paper to guarantee it. Flem felt insulted by this request and told him that he would never be able to revive the land this way, then left. Afterward, Jerome and Ernest met the waterman and helped the robot Sim improve its performance. Ernest began convincing these men to accept his offer of setting up a water line in his farm. And then, Ernest started digging to extract the old pump so that the watermen could inspect it. While he was working, he told Jerome that he needed to go out and meet a girl or at least make some friends, but Jerome preferred to focus on his work. On their way back home, they saw Flem passing by at a high speed. At the farm, Mary was washing the clothes by putting detergent in the vacuum cleaner. When Ernest arrived, he stopped her from going out again, which made Mary angry, and she told him that she was old enough to do whatever she wanted. When Ernest tried to explain that he just wanted to protect her, Mary responded by saying that she hated her father and that she loved Flem. Then, Mary attempts to escape, but she collides with Jerome and asks him for money, giving Ernest time to catch up with her and stop her. Mary starts crying, accusing Ernest of failing to protect the family. He then locks her in her room and breaks her window. After some time, Ernest and Jerome wake up to find that the robot, Sim, has been stolen. They split up, and Ernest goes to Sam's house to find out that Flem had left the area in the morning, driving towards the mountains. It is later revealed that Ernest's farm originally belonged to Sam, and that Flem is obsessed with the land he lost, despite Sam believing that the land is unsuitable for farming and that water won't help. Ernest then heads to the mountains to investigate, but suddenly, he gets hit on the head and loses consciousness. At night, Ernest wakes up in the watermen's camp to find himself accused of stealing their equipment using Sim. Ernest denies the accusation, but the leader, Caleb, beats him, and a violent struggle ensues. Feeling that the situation might turn deadly, Ernest steals Caleb's knife and grabs a gun. He fires into the air to keep people away and then runs off. Caleb continues to threaten him. On his way back home, Ernest sees Flem sleeping by the fire and Sim nearby. Sim has stolen the car and equipment to make Ernest look bad. Ernest waits until morning to wake Flem, places the gun to his face, and then ties Flem to Sim, who is carrying the equipment. They walk under the scorching sun to find the watermen. Flem provokes Ernest by talking about Mary, causing Ernest to drag him to the ground as punishment. In the end, both men are severely dehydrated and unable to endure any longer. Flem forces Ernest to stop and drink. It turns out that the equipment contains alcohol, not water, and Ernest starts suffering from alcohol poisoning because he is an addict. While Flem pretends to just be drinking, he claims that Caleb wants Ernest's head, so he stole the car to survive. In the end, Flem tries to give money to Ernest, but he refuses because the story seems suspicious. After that, Ernest tries to get up, but the alcohol makes him dizzy and unable to move. This was Flem's plan from the start, as he seizes the opportunity to hit Ernest with a rock, causing him to strike his head against the rocks, leading to bleeding and loss of consciousness. In his unconscious state, he recalls the incident with Catherine that happened due to his drinking habits. After a while, when Ernest regains consciousness, he finds himself tied to Sim, and Flem wakes up, screaming like a madman. Later, Flem goes to the farm, and Mary rides with him to escape together. Jerome, worried about Ernest, decides to search for him. By nightfall, Jerome finds Sim at the watermen's camp, where he is told that his father died in a car accident. When the time for the funeral arrives, Mary returns, and the siblings are all crying together. They also go to visit their mother to tell her the bad news. Flem drives them in the car and says he will return home, but Jerome refuses and decides to stay. Flem stops the car and asks about Ernest. When Jerome tells him that Ernest has died, Flem starts preparing to distance himself from them. Flem tells them that he wants to help, but Jerome kicks him out. At the farm, Jerome starts beating Sim severely out of anger, and Flem comes to stop him, explaining that while grief is difficult, he cannot let it ruin their source of income. Jerome is also surprised when Flem reveals that Mary is pregnant. Flem has big plans for the farm, and Jerome agrees to give it a try. In the afternoon, Flem takes equipment to the waterman and asks Caleb to install a water pipe on the farm. Initially, Caleb refuses, but Flem suddenly threatens him with responsibility for Ernest's death because Caleb's gun and knife were with the body. Fearing the consequences, Caleb immediately agrees to install the pipe on Ernest's land. After a few days, the new pump is officially installed, and Flem works hard all day to plant and grow the wheat, which is irrigated by sprinklers. The family can now enjoy a real shower. After a week, Jerome is surprised when he finds a small sprout growing in the soil, and eventually, beautiful plants cover the land. To celebrate, Flem and Mary decide to marry officially and they get matching tattoos during the ceremony. As Flem drinks, he can't stop thinking about Ernest's death. A few days later, Sam arrives at the farm with two bank representatives, revealing that Ernest's debts are very large and they demand Flem pay them. Flem takes the horses with his cart to appear tough, but Sam hits him and explains that no one ever wanted to buy the land, and Ernest had kept it because he never moved away. However, with the water and farming, the bank will be able to sell it. Therefore, Flem must pay now if he doesn't want to lose it. However, Flem puts Sim in his car and takes Ruby with Baby, claiming that they just want to look at the prices to get an idea. However, Flem sells Baby against Ruby's wishes. Ruby, scared, asks for Baby to be returned, but the buyer responds by shooting and killing Ruby. They also try to shoot Flem, who returns fire while escaping and leaves his car behind. Sim sustains damage from the gunfire, causing him to revert to his original state. The next day, Flem uses the money from Baby to pay the bank, but tells the siblings that he sold Sim to Ruby. Meanwhile, Sim arrives in the city and is discovered by the people who created him. At night, Calvin discovers the owner's information and calls the farm. Jerome answers the phone and begins to suspect something, so he goes to the local market and finds Flem talking to Suze, who is holding a doll in her arm and claiming it is her baby. When Jerome notices this, he tries to speak with them, but Flem quickly takes Suze away. At the farm, Jerome asks Flem about Ruby, but Flem says that Ruby took Sim and left his family. Jerome insists on uncovering the truth and announces he will visit his mother, but he takes a bus to the border where the guards refuse to let him pass since he is a minor and without a guardian. At that moment, Anna arrives and offers to help him cross the border for a fee. Jerome agrees, and Anna places him in a truck full of chickens. After a few hours, the truck arrives in the city, and Jerome sees it for the first time, then returns with Anna to the factory. Anna only takes half of the money and explains that the trip was a scam. He does not need a guide to return because no one will stop him. Jerome asks Anna if she has met someone named Ernest, but Anna does not remember the name. Jerome then meets Calvin, who explains how the device works and discovers that Sim's eyes are cameras designed to capture the slope for reforestation and record everything Sim sees. Calvin shows Jerome how to use it and leaves him alone. Jerome feels confused when he sees his father again, but this turns to horror when he discovers that Flem is the one who killed Ernest. It becomes clear that Flem had tied Ernest in the car and sent it to the watermen's camp, making it look like Sim had gone out of control and caused Ernest's death by accident. Jerome feels devastated in the middle of the office while the rain starts falling on the farm for the first time in over 10 years. Jerome returns quickly and pretends to be indifferent, asking Flem about how Sim was returned. Flem is shocked to find Sim in the barn, standing there unharmed. He says that Ruby must have returned it due to guilt. After several days, Jerome takes good care of Catherine, promising to look after her as Ernest did. One day, Flem and Jerome go hunting to keep animals away from the crops. Flem fails in all his shots and hands the rifle to Jerome, claiming that the gun is faulty to cover up his failure. Jerome has a strong desire to shoot Flem but instead kills a deer, proving that the problem was Flem's aim. When they return home, Jerome hides the rifle in his room. During lunch, Jerome says he received a call from Ruby looking for Flem, which angers Flem and makes him explode in rage, saying that Jerome is lying. Mary yells at Flem for his behavior, and Jerome confirms that he is telling the truth. Flem leaves the room angrily. The next day, Flem receives a letter from Ruby, but it is actually from Jerome. The letter contains a request for Flem to meet Ruby due to a problem before he leaves. Flem searches for the rifle, and Jerome tells him he took it for repair because Flem had said it was not working well. Flem has to act normally to avoid being exposed and apologizes for his outburst at the table. After taking a knife, Flem goes to the rocks with Sim and calls for Ruby. Suddenly, he falls into a hidden pit and breaks his leg. Flem screams in pain and asks Sim for help, but the device does not understand him. At that moment, Jerome appears and looks at Flem holding a stone, making Flem realize that Jerome knows the truth. Desperate, Flem pleads with Jerome for mercy, but Jerome ignores him and continues on his way, leaving Flem to suffer under the scorching sun. In the end, Flem begins to scream again and begs Jerome for help, talking a lot about accidents and regret, which makes Jerome so angry that he shoots Flem and kills him. Upon returning home, Jerome makes Mary believe that Flem was the one who left her and does not tell her how Ernest really died. Thanks to the crop money, they later managed to get real food. The siblings agreed to buy their mother's machine from the hospital so Catherine could live with them. Afterwards, Jerome deleted all the videos from Sim to start their lives anew.